Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are one day into the 2031 to 2032 off season, and it's going to be an interesting off season for our Buffalo Wings. Unlike previous years, we have some money to spend right now, and as we think about our arbitration eligible players, we've got two relatively expensive players, Samuel Basallo and Takao Ota, who we are considering not making offers to and or trading away. And clearly moving on from the two of them could clear up another $15 million. I don't realistically feel like we're going to move on from both of them, but definitely have a chance to move on from at least one of them. Have made offers to all of the other arbitration eligible players on our team as we prepare for the early stages of this offseason. And we also have submitted a qualifying offer to Hayden Yinger, who's been a starter for us for the past several years. He's looking for about $22.4 million a year over 4 years. A bit expensive for us to afford at this point. So at the very least, we're hoping by submitting the qualifying offer, we will get some draft pick compensation when he moves on to somebody else this offseason. And I mentioned that Samuel Basallo and Takao Ota, who have both been with us for the past 4 seasons, are both arbitration eligible this year, starting to make some more significant money, given that they are both very one-dimensional players. Power hitters who strike out a lot and don't bring much to the table defensively. And they're extremely similar players. You know, when we look at their potential ratings here, as far as their batting ratings, they're the same in contact. These are their actual ratings. Those are their potential ratings down there, but they're the same in contact. Basallo's got a little more gap power, home run power the same, the eye the same, and Ota is better at avoiding strikeouts. And looking at their potential, kind of a similar story. Same contact power, home run power, and gap power still favors Basallo, and avoid strikeouts. Basallo could make up a little bit of the difference between him and Ota at this point. So the bats are basically the same. And when we take a look at the defensive ratings of these two players, neither brings much to the table defensively. Certainly as a first baseman, Ota is better than Basallo, but it's not a particularly important defensive position. Basallo has the advantage of being able to at least play catcher, even though he's not a particular great defensive catcher. And Basallo actually could also play a horrible left field or right field defensively for us. So they are extremely similar players. Basallo is probably going to cost about $9 million. Ota will be in the high fives if we try to sign him before arbitration. So moving on from either of them could free up some money for us. I think that I am leaning towards keeping Basallo rather than Ota, even though he will be more expensive. He's about 2.5 years younger than Ota. He does have the versatility of being able to at least be a catcher for us in a pinch. And when we look at these players over the course of their careers, Basallo has also been a bit more productive than Ota. Looking at Ota's batting stats over his 4 years in the majors, 104 home runs, 111 WRC plus, but for his 162 game averages, he's 1 win above replacement when all is said and done. Comparing him to Basallo, who, as I mentioned, has also been in the major leagues for the exact same 4 years, 135 home runs from Basallo. His OPS plus is 120. and he's averaged a 2 WAR over the course of each 162 games played. So I don't think either is a bargain at this point, but with the exceptions of our third baseman Cam Collier and our center fielder Featherston, those are the only two left-handed bats we have in our lineup last year, or right now, signed for next season. And this past year, we had two additional bats in the lineup on many occasions. Basallo every day, and Ota frequently, even against left-handed pitching. So I don't know that we want to move on from both of those left-handed bats. And given that Basallo is 2.5 years younger, has been a more productive offensive player over the course of his career, and can also give us a little bit of optionality with his ability to play defense at catcher, I think he's the guy that we are leaning towards keeping if we do retain one of them. We're going to be exploring in the coming days what the trade value of both of those players is, as well as the trade value of some other players in our system. Initial look is that Ota, they have very similar trade value, but the initial look is that Ota may have a tiny bit more, I think simply because he's going to be about $3.5 million cheaper for whatever team takes him on. So we'll see whether we can get anything interesting from either of those two guys in trade in the coming days and weeks before we have to make a final decision on giving an arbitration offer to one or both of those first base / DH / corner outfield / in the case of Basallo, catchers. And before we get too deep into the off season, we are going to do our annual visit of some of the minor league prospects and other systems that we've either passed on in the draft or international amateur free agency, or in some cases were players that we have moved on from and traded to other teams to see how some of them are developing. But before we do that, we're also going to check in on Marcelo Meyer. He was our starting shortstop who suffered a significant injury towards the end of the 2030 season. He was signed for several more years at big money in the mid to high $20 million range each season. And he was already fragile at the time of the injury. So our fear was he would come back wrecked and or less proficient in terms of his batting and or fielding ratings, and potentially be a real contract albatross for us with a lot less value than he previously had. So we made the difficult decision last off season to trade him away. And of the things that we were afraid about, one came true and one did not. Marcelo Meyer did come back from that injury wrecked physically, so it's going to be a challenge for him to stay on the field. I think most years he's probably going to have a stint or two on the IL, and probably every third year or so he's going to have a season that's probably really fractured, where he misses months of the season, may not be available for the playoffs if his team makes the playoffs. So with him coming back wrecked, moving on from him in a very aggressive manner may have paid off for us. But his ratings when we checked in on him towards the start of the season were basically what they had always been. So from that perspective, he is still a very good major league shortstop. And he had a very good major league shortstop season for the Nashville Stars this past year. You can see he is wrecked physically, but his ratings are essentially what they have been. And when we look at the season that he put together for Nashville, only played around 120 games, but he hit 300 for the first time in his career, had a career high 138 WRC plus, a career best 5.7 WAR. He's still a very effective player when he is healthy. My question is how often he's going to be healthy. I would say the 120-ish games he played this past year is probably pretty close to a ceiling for him. You know, there's a chance he's going to have a season even as a rec player where he could get 130, 140 games maybe. But he's not going to be out there every day. And as I said, he's still signed for $26 million next year, $25 the year after that, $24 3 years from now, and then a team option for $33 million. So a lot of money still on the books with him. Obviously, would love to have that offensive and defensive combination at shortstop. He is a very good major league shortstop. But as I've talked about in some of the comments to recent episodes, I really like Tim Hull, the guy who was our third-round pick drafted in 2026. He certainly doesn't have the offensive profile that Meyer does, and he certainly doesn't have the defensive profile that Meyer does either. But he's not even 24 years old yet. He was pretty close to a league average offensive player for us this year, put up a WAR of close to 2 in less than half a season. So I think particularly if some of those skills develop a little bit over the next year or so, he could be a pretty interesting and certainly a very cost-effective is someone who's going to be making the major league minimum for the next couple years, shortstop for us for the next few seasons. So I kind of like our infield with Hull at shortstop, Cam Collier at third base, and Deshaun Seifu at second base. And we still have Willie Adames coming back next year as a super utility guy for us who should be able to play any of those 3 positions in a pinch. So we need to figure out what we're going to do at first base if we do move on from Ota. But first base is historically a pretty easy position to find somebody to play. I mean, we could even end up putting Basto there if we wanted to, although presumably if we keep Basto, he's going to be at DH, and hopefully we'd be able to find someone better than him defensively and better than Ota defensively, quite honestly, to play first base for us. And now that we've checked in on Marcelo Meyer, it's time to start checking in on some of the minor league prospects we've thought about picking and or drafting and or making offers to over the years. We'll start off with Derek Boot, who has only progressed to Double-A, hit 223 in high A ball this year with 10 homers, and then 228 with 12 homers in Double-A. He is an international amateur free agent signing that we really liked a few years ago, several years ago at this point, 6.5, almost 7 years ago. We really liked him and wanted to make an offer to him, but that is the year that we got a little aggressive and we made offers below what they were looking for to a couple of pitchers, and we signed those 2 pitchers early, and when all was said and done, we didn't have enough money left to compete with the Cubs for Boot, who got close to a maximum contract. But you look at his profile and he really hasn't developed as well as we would have hoped. And one of those pitchers who we did sign that year as an international free agent instead of Boot is Jorge Carrillo, who was up with us last year and spent the full season with us this year. He's been pretty productive both years, 2.76 ERA in 2030 and a 2.37 ERA this year with about a strikeout per inning both years. He's a durable player, going to be 26 years old at the start of next year. Good personality, throws in the mid to high 90s. And although he's only started 1 game for us at this point, with the almost certain departure of Hayden Yinger and the potential that will also be moving Ohtani from a pitcher to a position player this offseason, Carrillo likely to get a shot in our rotation this year. So although I didn't feel great about picking up a couple of pitchers instead of Boot, quite honestly, when we look at what Boot has become thus far compared to what Carrillo has become, I like the fact that our key international amateur free agent signing in 2025 was Mr. Carrillo rather than Mr. Boot. And another potential decent miss for us is Josh Blevins, a guy who I had strongly considered taking number 1 overall the year that we ended up taking Deshaun Seifu number 1 overall. And Seifu has become a huge part of our offense with his very unique skill set, great ability to generate extra base hits, a pretty good contact hitter, and he's led the National League in stolen bases 4 consecutive years. Blevins still looks like he could develop into a solid major league hitter, but he's almost 24 years old now, hasn't made it above Double-A. Did hit .298 with 20 homers and 26 doubles in Double-A this year, but he also struck out 136 times. So it looks like he should probably be contributing at the major league level, I would think, sometime towards the end of this upcoming season. But certainly feeling good about Seifu over Blevins at this point as well, given that, although Seifu's significantly older, given that he was a college player, we've already gotten 4.5 excellent major league seasons out of Seifu at this point. He's led the league in at-bats once, runs once, hits once, triples 3 times, and as I mentioned, stolen bases 4 times in his career. And he's only 27 years old, so he was a major leaguer, at a much younger age than Blevins is today, never having made it above Double-A ball yet. Shortstop prospect that we really liked a few years after the Blevins and Seifu decision was Roman Maples. Felt like he was going to be real solid defensively and had the potential for a decent bat. He spent 2 straight years in high A ball at this point, which is a little odd. But he's only hit .229 and .227 each of those years. Certainly looks like his glove is going to be a pretty good major league shortstop glove. The question is whether he's going to ever hit enough to stay up in the majors. Strikes out a ton, not much power, but his contact, gap, power, and eye are not too far off being a competent major leaguer. So just a matter of developing a little bit more power and not striking out quite so much. 184 strikeouts in 130 games played this past year in high A ball, and he turned 23 right at the end of the season. Mike Goodwin is a prospect that we liked, and I know he's a prospect that some viewers really loved. I believe it was a year or two after we had picked Seifu, and I kind of went in a different direction just because I didn't want another player exactly like Seifu, although as some of you have pointed out at the time, Goodwin actually has a potentially much better eye than Seifu does. Speed not quite as good, defense not quite as good, but still a really interesting prospect. Hit just .201 with 7 homers when they started him in high A ball, even though he had been pretty successful in high A ball the year before. Did end up moving up to Double-A this past year where he batted just .239, but did have 7 doubles, 6 triples, and 6 home runs. And I may have said he had 7 homers in A ball. That was 2 homers. It was 7 ribbies in high A ball this year. So he's been a below average offensive player the last couple of years. Still viewed as the number 82 prospect in baseball. Still somebody that if he develops 80 to 90% of where our scout thinks he can develop, could still be a pretty useful player with that excellent speed, great personality, good bunting, durability, ability to hit for pretty good contact, generate a lot of extra base hits, pick up some walks. Going to be tough to find a position defensively that you feel real comfortable playing him at, but with his bat, you'll likely make some room for him somewhere on the roster if he develops to his full potential. And Juan Estrada, you may remember, was a potential draftee out of junior college the same year that we looked at. He's viewed as the number 42 prospect in baseball. He was actually a potential guy who could be either a batter or a pitcher. Looks like the Pirates have focused on making him a pitcher, and he made his major league debut relatively early in the season this year. Pitched in 58 games, including 7 starts, 10-5 record with a 2.91 ERA over 99 innings pitched, a WAR of close to 2. So Estrada is certainly a guy who has developed well and looks like he could be, a solid middle of the rotation pitcher for many years to come for the Pirates. So that's a guy who wouldn't have been the worst guy to bring onto our team, even though we did go in a different direction in 2028. A couple of more recent prospects definitely caught some commentary from the draft this year that some felt that we should have went with Ben Pickle, who our scout actually recommended to us in the first round. We picked 23rd. He ended up going 28th to the Nashville Stars organization. Looks like he got signed late, though, so he did not actually get to make his professional debut this season, unfortunately. He's a college player, obviously, coming out of Minnesota University Mankato. You look at his ratings relative to the single A FCL, and it looks like he's probably ready to begin right there. Unfortunate that he didn't get any playing action this year. Certainly looks like someone who could be a pretty good major league bat if he completely develops, but as his development was not enhanced by the fact that once his college season was over, he unfortunately did not play any other organized ball in this 2031 season. And a pitching prospect who was mentioned by a viewer or two ahead of this year's draft as somebody that we should consider if he was available is Mike Moore, the college pitcher out of Oregon, viewed as the number 43 prospect in baseball. Unfortunately, he went the pick before we drafted, so we didn't have an opportunity to pick him up, but certainly would have been in the mix if he had been available. He's durable. You can see looking at his ratings, he's not too far off from being a potential starter at the major league level. Like the fact that he's a ground baller pitcher with ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s, and looks like he's going to have pretty good movement on his pitches, so he should not give up a lot of home runs. He pitched one game in rookie ball for the Seattle Mariners organization, and then got promoted up to A-ball, where he went 2-1 with a 5.56 ERA. Obviously a pretty small sample size there with 22 2/3 innings. You look at the Single A California League, and his rating suggests that he's probably going to be more effective at that level than he was this year. Would expect he's probably going to make it up to at least double A ball next year, and then in the 2033 season would not be surprised to see Mr. Moore making his major league debut. And the last two prospects we'll look at are guys who were big prospects in our system that we ended up trading away. Ali Ostendorf is a pitcher that we took second overall, I believe in 2027. Yeah, 2027. We took him second overall. Didn't love the way that he was developing, although he's still viewed as the number 24 prospect in baseball. Some of the things we loved about him when we picked him up, his durability, good personality. He now throws in the mid to high 90s. and certainly looks like someone who is going to boast at least a 4-pitch arsenal, possibly a 5-pitch arsenal. And his ratings are not that far off from major league level at this point. It's Ollie's 23rd birthday today, so happy birthday, Ollie. But he's only made it up to high A ball in the Braves organization. Spent the entire year in high A this year, 6-8 with a 5.28 ERA. So not particularly productive. Our concern with him was just the insane number of walks he had been putting up for us. And he's gotten a little better in terms of his control this year, I guess, with 69 strikeouts and 119 and a third innings. There were times with us when he was basically walking a batter per inning. So he has improved a bit while he's been in the Braves organization. As I said, looking at his ratings, it seems like he's probably not too far off from being major league ready, but he still has only made it to high A ball, and his control of 40 is going to be borderline problematic if he can't get it a little better over the next couple of years. And last but not least, those of you who have been following the series over the years knew that this was coming. Andres Big Baby Medina, an international amateur free agent who we thought was going to be a perennial all-star catcher for us and a perennial Gold Glove winner. Loved his durability, loved his leadership in the clubhouse, loved his potentially excellent catcher ability. The issue has been that his bat has really struggled to develop, and you can see he's 24 years old at this point, and he's only made it to high A ball as well. Now, he did have a productive offensive year in high A ball, hitting .278 with 21 homers and 64 ribbies and 360 at-bats. The big issue with Medina remains that he just strikes out an insane amount of times, 150 strikeouts in 95 games this year. Still see him as being a 4-star potential player. He's still viewed as the number 15 prospect in all of baseball, but certainly when we originally signed him as an international amateur free agent in 2024, so 7.5, almost 8 years ago. Certainly would have expected that by the time he was 24 years old, he was going to be a major leaguer, or at least close to a major leaguer. And he's probably still 1.5 years, 2 years away. You know, I said he's played in high A ball this year, but you look at those ratings compared to even double A, and he's going to hit a lot of home runs at that level, but he's going to be striking out a lot too. So he still has some growth that's going to need to take place to become an effective major league player. He's a guy who, if he wasn't viewed as the number 15 prospect in baseball and he could be had for a decent price, I'd certainly take a flyer on. But moving on from Medina when he wasn't developing as well as we hoped was a tough decision for us, but one that I think was right when all was said and done. The main piece we got back for Medina from the Phillies when we traded him away was Andrew Painter, who's been a solid member of our starting rotation for 5 seasons now. He's never been as good as we hoped he would. You can see he's put up a 4.62 ERA over those 5 years with us. Is coming off of arguably his best season with us, 12-6 record, 3.98 ERA. But he's been a solid, respectable major league starter for us over the years. I think we kind of hoped he was going to be a 2 or 3 starter when we made the trade for him. And he's really definitely settled in as more of a number 4 starter with his ratings and his performance over the years. But given that Medina is now 24 years old and still hasn't even made it to double A ball, feel like that deal's worked out decently for us thus far. And I mentioned that it seems like if we do move on from Takao Ota or Samuel Basallo, that it seems like Ota may have slightly more trade value. So we've been investigating sending Ota to the Dodgers for the 27-year-old reliever Chris SAbotka, who we think could also potentially start on the margins. And Ota for SAbotka straight up requires a pretty good prospect or a pretty good player from us. So we're not quite there. We have made another offer to them. SAbotka kind of looks like a 3 or 4 starter to me. I think with the 65 stamina and the fact that he's got an excellent fastball and a decent sinker or splitter, he could be a 3-pitch starter. His stuff, movement, and control all potentially a little bit above average. But he's 27 years old now, and he's set to make a little over $6 million next year in arbitration. So we wouldn't be freeing up any money by moving on from Ota to SAbotka. But what it would potentially let us do is bring in a solid but not excellent major league starter. You can see over the course of his career with the Dodgers, he's been pretty close to league average in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Been a bit above average in terms of his WAR, generally putting up a 2.5-ish WAR over most of the past 4 seasons. Coming off of a rough year, the worst year of his career in terms of his raw numbers with a 5.80 ERA. But his Sierra was significantly better than that, and he did win a career-high 13 games. The reason I would consider this is, one, I don't think, as we've talked about, that Ota at $6 million next year is great value. Feel like there's a little better value in SAbotka. But the other reason that I'd consider this, if we can add in somebody who's not quite as good as the players they're looking for to get this done, would be that if we did bring on SAbotka, that would definitely free us up to move Ohtani into right field for us, which at this point would fill one of the biggest holes we have. As I talked about, we're real comfortable at second, third, and short. We're obviously very comfortable with Adley Rutschman at catcher, and we're pretty good in left and center field with Vance Honeycutt and John Featherston. So right field, first base, and DH are our only holes. Obviously, we can fill first base and DH by just bringing back Basallo and Ota. But if we move on from Ota in a trade like this for someone like SAbotka, that lets us put Ohtani into right field for next year, gives us a big bat in the middle of our lineup, and I think it's probably potentially easier to fill a hole at first base than any other position. So from that perspective, moving on from Ota might not be the worst thing in the world. And since the money for SAbotka is about the same, that would put us in a position where we're still going to have the mid-teens to spend this coming off season. And at that point, we'd feel like our rotation is kind of set, and we really just need to find a first baseman and a DH. And again, bringing Basallo back handles the DH. So it's really having a decent amount of money to potentially look for a couple of relievers, backup outfielder, backup infielder, and maybe even put a little extra money into scouting and player development. So I'm going to keep investigating that trade. Obviously going to keep investigating whether there's any better options than that involving Basallo or Ota or any of the other players that we may want to move on from this offseason. But that's kind of something that we are exploring right now. And unfortunately, still kind of looking at the same package of players to get SAbotka with Takao Ota, and we had added in a minor league reliever, Dave McCarthy, who is a guy who could potentially be a fifth starter in a pinch. 23 years old, was 11-8 with a 4.91 ERA in high A ball, so not a top prospect, but we're hoping that might be able to put in a 2 or 3 guys like McCarthy rather than one of the better prospects in our system or one of the better players in our system. And unfortunately, it seems like we're going to have to do that to get a guy like SAbotka on board. So not quite ready to pull the trigger on that type of trade quite yet. And as I mentioned, we've got offers out to the arbitration eligible players that I am interested in making offers to this offseason. Still need to figure out what we're going to do with Ota and Basallo, and I don't want to rush it, so I'm not just going to make an immediate trade to make a trade. I want to give this some thought, think things through. If those of you who are watching share some thoughts on the direction we should go, obviously want to factor those in as well. So I'm going to kind of finish up the episode here. But before we finish up, we're going to take a look at the upcoming free agents. And pitching-wise, definitely some interesting relievers. Cade Smith, a guy who was briefly on our team a season ago for a few months before we traded him away. Looks like one of the better higher-end relievers that is going to be potentially out there. Shane Bieber, former starter for us for several years. Castillo, who was on our team this year. Garrett Crochet, who's been on our team before. So definitely some familiar names. Certainly Andrew Nardi and the starting pitcher Shane McClanahan look like the class of the potential free agent class. Don't know that we've got quite enough money to bring either of them on board. And other than McClanahan, Griffin McClarty looks like the best other starting pitcher available potentially in free agency. So it's not a particularly high-end or impressive starting pitching free agent class. All the more reason to maybe try to renew something with SAbotka there, but just don't want to give up as much as they're looking for. Hayden Yinger, we mentioned from our team, says he's looking for $22 million from us, but it claims that his demand is only going to be $4 million. Yeah, it still says he's looking for 22.4 from us. That does scare me a little bit as far as the qualifying offer that we're making to him, that maybe he would accept it. So that's something that we'll have to give some thought to over the next few weeks. We've obviously got time to pull that QO back, but just kind of wondering any thoughts any of you have on the situation where he says he wants $22.4 million a year for 4 years from us, but on this screen it claims that his demand is only going to be $4 million. So that's a interesting situation for us to think about. As far as the batters, the class of the free agent class here, Edwin Arroyo, the shortstop from the Reds, outstanding glove. The bat probably hasn't developed as much as the Reds would have hoped it would here in 2023 in real life, and he is now fragile as far as his injury proneness, but still a extremely productive shortstop who you can see put up an 8.8 WAR in the 2029 season. 25 homers, 38 doubles, hit .289. His batting average has been trending downwards over these last couple years. Don't know if maybe his ratings have also with those injuries. Yeah, taking a look at the scouting report, a couple years ago when he was having that big 2029 season, our scout, for one, has certainly felt that his contact and his power were a bit better than they are today. So looks like he might be trending a little bit negative in terms of his offensive production, but still obviously a very valuable player. Wander Franco, again, the bat in this fictional world is probably not exactly what it would be hoped that he might become today in real life, but still a pretty useful offensive player. Split last year between Montreal and Miami. You may remember we did try to make a play for him at the All-Star break, and the price for us was prohibitive, although it seems like, and we talked about this at the time, that Montreal let him go to Miami for an offer that I didn't think was quite as good as what we had offered. And then Jackson Holliday, the second baseman, another solid defensive player, guy who's also fragile, though, at this point. Decent major league bat, coming off of a year where he won a batting crown, hitting .322 for the Yankees with 21 homers. So three pretty high-end infielders in their late 20s and early 30s on the market. A few outfielders, Dylan Carlson, Pete Crow Armstrong, Nelvi Marte also on the potential free agent list. So Cincinnati, who did win back-to-back World Series a few years ago, is now in the situation where a lot of that young talent that helped them win those series looks to be hitting free agency. A couple of expensive first basemen if we decided to go that way. Catcher Jose Trevino potentially going to be out there. And then a lot of three-star potential kind of guys at just about any position we could possibly want to go after offensively. So a lot for us to think about, a lot for us to consider, and we're going to give these things some thought before we kind of move too far ahead with this off season. So if you have any thoughts on directions we should or shouldn't go, always love to hear them in the comments, and we'll be back in our next episode and kind of let you know the decisions that we've ended up making and the directions that we end up trying to go. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.